It's 2:47 a.m., not a soul on the streets. Deep inside a Russian command bunker, the only sound is a tired air defense operator sipping cold coffee while a glowing radar screen sweeps over and over, showing absolutely nothing. For 48 hours straight, Russia believes the sky is quiet, safe, under control. But just 78 miles away, that false confidence is about to get turned into a $700 million fireball. Tonight, a single strike will prove that modern war isn't won by size, but by brainpower. Not by billion-dollar stealth jets, but by timing, deception, and technology working together like a precision machine. 3 Storm Shadow cruise missiles, each weighing nearly 3,000 pounds, are slicing through the night at 600 miles per hour. They're not coming alone. A swarm of smart drones is watching every moment, ready to turn one factory into a permanent outage for Putin's war machine. This is the future of warfare. Welcome to War Mechanics, where we break down the battles shaping tomorrow's military power. Buckle up. This one changes everything. To understand why this strike changed the course of the war, we need to understand the target. The Bryansk chemical plant wasn't just another factory tucked away in Russia's endless industrial sprawl. It was a command center of firepower, a place where explosives were transformed into the propellant that launches Moscow's deadliest weapons. Nearly 40% of Russia's rocket artillery and cruise missile fuel came from this single complex. Every time a Kh-59 missile flew toward a Ukrainian apartment building, this plant helped push it there. Every time a TOS-1A thermobaric blast tore through a frontline trench, the chemistry inside started here. One location, one supply chain, one pressure point holding up an entire war strategy. On October 21st, the plant was running at maximum heat, more than 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Machines roaring, tanks filled to the brim. Workers unaware that tonight would be the last shift they'd ever complete. Russia thought the plant was invincible. It sat under the protection of S-400 air defenses capable of tracking targets the size of a baseball from more than 100 miles away. Pantsir-S1 systems were stationed nearby to finish anything that slipped through. Electronic warfare units stood ready to scramble GPS and blind any incoming threat. Billions invested. Air defenses layered like medieval castle walls. Because the Kremlin knew the truth, losing this site wouldn't just slow the war, it would choke it. Ukraine didn't need a massive fleet. They didn't need American stealth bombers. They didn't even need to cross into Russian airspace. What they needed was brains over brawn. A plan built on precision timing and exploiting every weakness the Russians refused to admit they had. A superpower's war machine depends on fuel. Take away the fuel, and the machine stops. And on that night, Ukraine decided Russia's machine was going to stop. Question for you. If one strike could cripple nearly half of an enemy's firepower, would you consider that a smarter weapon or a smarter strategy? What do you think matters more? So how does a nation with a smaller air force break open the shield of a superpower? Ukraine used a strategy built on 3 perfectly synchronized layers, see the target clearly, confuse the defenses totally, and strike with precision before anyone understands what is happening. It began long before the first missile launched. Ukrainian intelligence needed to confirm that the Bryansk plant was running hot full of explosive materials and producing at maximum output. That meant if the strike succeeded, the results wouldn't just be destructive, they would be catastrophic. A single recon platform flew close enough to capture the thermal heat signature rising from the factory's heart. The message was clear, the target was ready. Then came deception. Ukraine sent a swarm of small drones toward the air defenses. They flew erratically. They buzzed loudly on radar screens. They created chaos, forcing Russian operators to engage in a digital shell game, trying to understand which threats were real and which ones were just noise. But that confusion was exactly the point. While Russia focused on the noisy distractions, the real danger flew silent and low. 3 precision missiles skimmed just above the treetops, hidden from radar by the Earth's own curve. They didn't need to be fast. They needed to be unseen. As they advanced, their onboard guidance adjusted, constantly reading the terrain like a self-driving car and staying below the level where the Russian radar could look. What happened next is the true genius of this operation. Ukraine didn't try to overpower Russia's defenses. They simply told those defenses to look in the wrong direction. Russia took the bait, and once an enemy is blinded by its own assumptions, the rest becomes simple. Invisible weapons, open sky, a straight line to the most important factory in Putin's war. So here's something to think about in the age of high-tech warfare. What's more dangerous, the weapon you can see or the one you never notice until it's too late? Before any weapon left the canisters, Ukraine needed certainty. Hitting a plant while it was cold would be an expensive show with a little payoff. Striking when it was hot full of fuel and live production meant maximum damage and maximum disruption. So intelligence became the real first strike. A small reconnaissance asset collected thermal data that left little room for doubt. Analysts compared recent imagery, cross-checked industrial activity, and watched for the telltale glow of a plant running at full capacity. That thermal signature, intense, concentrated, and sustained, was the single signal that turned a plan into a go order. It was the difference between a risky raid and a surgical knockout. But confirmation wasn't just about a picture. Analysts looked for corroborating signs, shipment schedules, local worker patterns, power consumption anomalies, and other open-source indicators that showed the facility was operating at peak output. Multiple sources converged on the same conclusion. The plant was loaded vulnerable and worth striking. This phase of the operation shows a fundamental truth of modern conflict: information is a weapon. You can buy missiles and jets, but a single accurate piece of intelligence can turn a modest strike into a strategic catastrophe for your opponent. The recon wasn't flashy. There were no headlines about it. But without that quiet, precise work, nothing to follow would have mattered. The strike's timing, the choice of munitions, and the expectation of cascading logistical damage all depended on getting that confirmation right. What matters more to you in a high-stakes mission like this perfect patient intelligence or moving fast with overwhelming firepower? Cheap things have a way of breaking expensive systems. On paper, it makes no sense to spend a fortune on layered air defenses, then watch them waste their best interceptors on a cloud of cheap toys. But that's exactly the logic Ukraine used, and it's brutally effective. The purpose of the swarms wasn't to score headline hits. It was to impose a cost. Disposable drones force an opponent into a terrible economic choice: either ignore the nuisance and risk letting real threats through, or burn high-end interceptors and top-dollar missiles to stop what looks like danger. Over time, that cost adds up. The defender pays out millions to stop what the attacker is buying for thousands. More than money, swarms create cognitive overload. Radar operators suddenly have dozens of contacts on their screens. Algorithms designed to prioritize the biggest, fastest returns get overloaded, and human teams start making snap judgments. Confusion breeds delay. Delay becomes opportunity. Opportunity becomes a hole in the defense. The brilliance isn't just in the bait, it's in the timing and the psychology. A well-timed swarm makes the defenders react the way the attackers want. It turns expensive systems into blunt instruments, and it turns the defender's investment in technology against itself. There's also a moral and editorial angle here. Using disposable systems that put civilians at risk raises questions. When debris falls into rivers or populated areas, the human cost becomes part of the tactical equation. Coverage should never glorify the tactics without noting the humanitarian and environmental toll. Low-cost, high-effect operations are the future of asymmetric warfare. They don't look impressive on a parade ground, but they work. What's your take? Is spending millions to stop thousands a failure of planning, or simply the new cost of doing business in modern war? Tell us where you stand and why. Electronic warfare turned this strike from clever into unstoppable. When defenders flipped the switch to jam satellite navigation, the mission didn't collapse, it switched modes. That's the difference between resilient systems. One falls apart when its preferred tool is taken away, the other keeps working because it was built to survive disruptions. At a high level, GPS jamming is simply noise injected into the signals that modern weapons rely on for course corrections. It's loud, chaotic, and it can blind a munition that has no fallback. But the missiles used in this operation were not flying blind. They carried layered guidance. When the satellite link died, internal navigation systems kept track of motion. Those systems are tied to preloaded terrain data and image references that act like a map in the missile's head. Think of it as a car switching from live navigation to a highly detailed offline map and an accurate odometer. The missile compares what it sees, a snapshot of the ground, against what it already has stored, and it adjusts accordingly. That's how accuracy survives signal chaos, redundancy, and verification, not dependence on one single input. Electronic warfare didn't stop there. Moscow fired up powerful jammers to create a broad denial zone, and they scrambled fighter jets to hunt launch platforms. Those moves mattered, but they were part of a trade-off. When you exhaust your options trying to erase incoming signals, you reveal other weaknesses, opening windows for countermeasures and sophisticated decoys that do more than just distract. This strike also used high-end decoys and anti-radiation tactics that targeted the sensors themselves, not just the weapons. By forcing defenders to react to fakes, the attackers created corridors of reduced attention and resource strain. The net effect: the expensive layered defenses that looked impenetrable were forced into brittle high-pressure decision cycles, and brittle systems break. Resilience in modern warfare is about anticipating the counter-building multiple ways to reach the same result and forcing your opponent into uncomfortable choices. Which matters more to you, overwhelming force that can be beaten if its key tool is removed, or flexible systems designed to keep working when everything else fails? The weapons did their job. The factory did not. 3 precision strikes found their marks inside the Bryansk complex. The explosions were internal detonations that turned sealed production halls into pressure cookers. When a charge goes off inside a building full of volatile propellant, the blast doesn't just punch a hole. It amplifies itself, ripping structures apart from the inside. Steel frames, twisted roofs peeled back, and entire production lines collapsed in a matter of seconds. The immediate physics produced a firestorm. Tanks of fuel cooked off, stored propellant ignited in cascading secondary detonations. Superheated gases and burning chemicals produced towering black plumes that were visible from miles away and registered as intense thermal anomalies by commercial satellites. Within minutes, imagery showed a cratered, smoldering complex and thermal signatures that left little doubt the facility had suffered catastrophic internal damage. On the ground, local residents captured grainy night footage, sudden fireballs lighting the horizon windows, rattling in nearby towns, and terrified calls to emergency services. Those clips circulated on messaging channels and were quickly aggregated by analysts watching open-source feeds. International satellite data confirmed what citizen videos suggested: a massive industrial conflagration centered on a site tied to rocket propellant production. The strike's material effects were immediate and severe. Analysts working from imagery, on-the-ground reports, and supply chain estimates converged on a damaging figure: roughly $700 million in direct losses and destroyed capacity. More consequential than the dollar figure, however, was the operational impact. Large percentages of propellant stockpiles ruined, assembly lines destroyed, and storage infrastructure compromised. There was an environmental consequence as well. Runoff and airborne chemical particulates flowed into nearby waterways. Emergency agencies reported contamination concerns and temporary shutdowns of downstream rail and road corridors used for military logistics. Those disruptions compounded the production losses, turning a single night of violent destruction into a multi-day logistical crisis. By the time official statements arrived, state media framed the event in muted terms. But the archive of satellite thermal frames, the flood of local video, and the downstream halting of shipments created an evidentiary record that was hard to deny. The visual proof heat signatures, plume trajectories, and ruined infrastructure told the story plainly: a decisive, destructive strike that degraded a core element of an adversary's war-making capacity. A destroyed factory is not just a pile of rubble. It's a ripple that spreads outward through supply chains, battlefields, and the decisions of generals who suddenly face shortages they never planned for. The Bryansk strike disrupted a key artery in Russia's war economy. Almost overnight, the availability of crucial rocket propellant dropped. Artillery units that once operated with confidence now faced uncertainty. Requests for resupply that were previously routine began coming back delayed or denied. When a modern army can't feed its guns, its strategy starts to crack. The logistical disruption ran deeper than canceled shipments. Transportation crews halted rail operations along a major corridor due to contamination concerns. Railways are the steel backbone of Russia's military mobility, and a shutdown of even a few dozen miles creates choke points that cascade across the map. Convoys stalled. Stockpiles were redirected. Timetables fell apart. Then came the defensive panic. Moscow couldn't afford another strike on critical infrastructure, so commanders pulled high-value air defense systems away from the front lines and rushed them back to industrial centers. Every redeployment created blind spot zones where Ukrainian operators suddenly found new opportunities to push back. The math was simple: protect production or protect soldiers. Russia tried to do both and ended up compromising both. Strategic pressure isn't just physical, it's psychological. A nation that publicly denies damage can insist everything is fine. But soldiers on the front notice when ammunition runs dry. Engineers notice when replacement parts stop arriving, and commanders notice when they must postpone the very offensives they've been ordered to accelerate. Doubt spreads faster than any drone. The timing mattered as well. This strike landed at a moment when Russia was preparing broader operations in contested regions. Suddenly, the math of the battlefield changed. Plans had to be rewritten. Schedules shifted. A single night under the glow of an industrial inferno forced a recalibration of an entire front. This wasn't just a clean tactical win, it was a wound that kept bleeding financially, logistically, and mentally. Ukraine didn't just knock out a factory. They disrupted momentum. They reshaped priorities. They showed that when you cut fuel from a war machine, the war machine begins to stumble. How significant do you think a supply chain disruption like this is to the course of a conflict? When the ground erupts in fire and a supply chain collapses overnight, the truth becomes a battlefield of its own. Moscow responded to the Bryansk strike with silence. First then, with carefully crafted language, a technical incident nothing to worry about. No videos, no acknowledgement of explosives, no word about why emergency crews swarmed a supposedly normal facility in the middle of the night. But in the digital age, silence doesn't erase evidence. While state channels tried to downplay the event, satellite imagery showed an unmistakable heat bloom where a factory once stood. Citizens posted shaky clips of fireballs bright enough to turn night into day. Analysts tracked toxic plumes drifting over rail lines that suddenly shut down. The official narrative and the observable reality diverged, and everyone watching could see the gap widen. That gap is where psychological warfare lives. When frontline troops hear rumors that ammunition isn't arriving, when factory workers are told to return to a place that no longer exists, when officers must rewrite plans without admitting why confidence erodes. A government can deny damage, but it cannot deny consequences. Soldiers operating artillery systems feel the shortage. Commanders facing delayed offensives feel the pressure. And the public watching unanswered questions pile up feels the shift. Propaganda thrives when people cannot check the facts themselves, but here the facts were visible from space. The world saw the blast, the world saw the firestorm, and the world watched as Russia struggled to maintain a calm face while scrambling behind the scenes. Morale isn't broken by explosions alone. It's broken when people realize their leaders can't stop them. It's broken when myths of invulnerability collapse in real time. This strike didn't just destroy infrastructure, It damaged belief, a far more fragile and far more powerful asset. Do you think losing confidence in leadership can be as dangerous to a war effort as losing ammunition? Reporting on advanced military operations is not just about analyzing tactics and technology. It's also about understanding the responsibility that comes with explaining how modern warfare works. When missiles hit industrial infrastructure, it's not just enemy equipment at risk. There are workers on shift, families living nearby, and entire communities connected to the site through water power and transportation. Any breakdown of these events must make room for the civilian and environmental impact that follows. Chemical facilities like the one struck in Bryansk store volatile materials that can leak into river soil and air after explosions. Contamination could travel far beyond the blast radius and linger long after the headlines disappear. If we're going to highlight the sophistication of a military strike, we also owe our audience context about the cost paid by those who never chose to be part of the conflict. Open source imagery and citizen videos are incredibly valuable, but the people who share them often do so without realizing the risks. Locations can be identified, faces can be recognized, metadata can expose them to retaliation. Ethical coverage means blurring identities, removing traceable data, and avoiding sensationalism that puts civilians in danger. We also must be transparent about how we know what we know. A number like 40% of rocket fuel or a dollar figure for damage should be clearly presented as estimates based on multiple reliable sources, not treated as undisputed fact. War is chaotic, and responsible reporting acknowledges that uncertainty. Finally, there's a line between explaining a strategy and enabling harm. We break down concepts, not tactics. We describe the big picture without offering a blueprint. Modern conflict is already full of imitation and escalation. Our coverage should not accelerate either. Warfare isn't just a contest of firepower. It's a contest of truth, accountability, and how the story is told. One night, 3 missiles, one strike that Russia never saw coming. The Bryansk attack wasn't about overwhelming force, it was about precision timing and exposing the weak point inside a massive war machine. When a factory supplying nearly half of Russia's rocket fuel goes dark, the battlefield feels it. Plans change, convoys stall, confidence shakes. This is what modern warfare looks like: information over intimidation, deception over brute strength. A smaller military can outthink a larger one and rewrite the rules. If you want to understand how technology, strategy, and innovation decide tomorrow's conflicts, you're in the right place. War Mechanics is here to break it down, step by step, strike by strike. Where do you think the next pressure point lies in this war? What target would change everything again? Hit like, share your thoughts below, and subscribe to stay ahead of the tactics shaping the future of military power. War Mechanics, where strategy becomes reality.